Happy Friday, just about a week before, maybe 2 weeks before our break, Christmas break. Are we counting the days? Yes. Well, we have a great lineup. We have our first speaker this morning, Mr. Hipolito Acosta. He's the author of the Shadow Catcher, and we have some books that we're going to be giving out this morning. We have about 10 of those, so we'll pull some names and distribute them out. He's going to tell you all about himself, so I don't want to make a lot of introductions about him, because he has in his presentation a lot of information about his background. But he worked with the Homeland Security and Border Patrol, and has great stories, and we'll talk to you about some of the things that are affecting our immigration system today, and some of his experiences. He was here yesterday. Thank you for being here yesterday with Center for Safe and Secure Schools, which was a great presentation and training yesterday. And he's also been with the superintendents about a month ago. So if you ever go to some of your superintendent's office, you might see a copy of this in their offices. So, without further ado, please help me welcome Mr. Hipolito Acosta.
If you don't mind, I have some notes. So I'm going to put my notes up here. As we get a little bit younger, it's harder to see closer, and it's harder to see from far away. So I think I'll just stand up here. But thank you so much for inviting me to participate in your conference today. I'm truly honored. And one of the things that I'd like to start out with, because I do a lot of presentation before educators, is in the work that you are in, let me share with you how grateful I am of our educational opportunities and all who work so diligently to educate our youth. It's extremely important for me. And whatever role each of you have in this area, please accept my sincere appreciation. It was never lost on me when I headed up our agency's operation in Latin America and the Caribbean, when I was assigned to the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, that it was because of dedicated educators and role models, as well as being born in the best country in the world, that made it possible for someone from an extremely poor background that could rise to the ranks and become a senior level official with our Department of Justice, as well as representing our country at a senior diplomatic level. So I attribute this to the individuals who have been so great role models and who were willing to take a chance on a young kid from West Texas from a very poor background. As Jesus stated, I retired from the Department of Homeland Security as the District Director here in Houston, and enforcement of U.S. immigration laws was a profession I had the honor of serving for almost 30 years, starting with the U.S. Border Patrol on the southwest border in Marfa, Texas. This was followed by service in interior cities of the United States, as well as serving at 4 U.S. diplomatic missions outside the United States for almost 13 years, before finishing my career as the District Director of the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services here in Houston in 2005. Today, I'd like to give you a brief summary of my background, where I've been, how I got there, followed by sharing some of my experiences with you that include starting out on the front lines along the U.S.-Mexico border, serving in the Midwest for a number of years, my experiences in infiltrating counterfeit document vending rings, as well as human smuggling organizations operating inside and outside the United States. Some of the stories you will find in my book, The Shadow Catcher, and others will be told in subsequent writings. And I'm proud to tell you that I just finished my second book. While I enjoy sharing my experiences in undercover operations, I also want to take some time to speak to you about the sensitive topic of immigration, because it has a tremendous impact on your profession and your communities. I think we need to include a discussion about the recent human crisis along the southern border that saw more than 60,000 children brought into our country. I think it's important to talk about the impact it has on our everyday lives, the government's response to this particular crisis, I think it's also important to talk about DACA, the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, and the recent executive order issued by President Obama that allows undocumented aliens in the country who meet certain criteria to remain in the United States, as well as issue employment authorization. I think these are topics that need to be forefront, and I'm sure that you all have seen a lot of discussion and certainly a lot of attention from the media. As a matter of fact, if you might have seen this morning that the governor, actually the Homeland Security for the state of Texas has requested or is authorizing $60 million more to spend on border security. And there's a lot of issues whether that's the right thing to do or not the right thing to do, but that's a lot of funds that are going into, that in my view could be going into other areas such as education. But then again, that's a decision for the political leaders to make, and certainly for everybody to be aware of what the costs are for securing our borders, for maintaining security in our communities. Well, I started by saying my career in immigration enforcement. Let me assure you that immigration is much more so than just protecting our borders and arresting undocumented aliens in the country. While I will concentrate today on some of the cases that I worked and which I write about in my book, let me share with you some of the other areas I had the privilege to work in and duties I had an opportunity to undertake during my career, besides arresting individuals. This included processing Cuban refugees in Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, where I served as the assistant officer in charge of INS operations during the Mariel boat lift that saw over 125,000 Cubans land on the shores of Florida in 1980. I worked on handling applications at camps throughout the Philippines of Vietnamese who fled their country after 1975, as well as children who were classified as Emiratians who had been left in South Vietnam under the Orderly Departure Program in Ho Chi Minh City. I was the officer in charge, serving our INS team on board the U.S. Naval Ship Comfort as we interdicted over 25,000 Haitians that were leaving their country in very perilous conditions. I established the first permanent INS office in Havana, Cuba. It might be a surprise to you all that we actually have an immigration office in Havana, Cuba. I infiltrated human smuggling organizations throughout the United States and throughout Latin America, and I established procedures to target human smugglers based in foreign countries who believed they were beyond our reach. That ultimately resulted in the successful prosecution of over 100 criminal operatives that were violating our laws but had not set foot in the United States. And finally, one of the projects that I started when I was a district director at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, I established a program to work with foreign governments in setting up operations to interdict thousands of intended illegal migrants from reaching the U.S. border, and in doing so, extended the security of our country way beyond the southwest border. By way of background, I was born in Presidio, Texas. I joined the U.S. Navy when I was 17 years old, one of the best decisions that I made in my life. 1 year after finishing my 4-year commitment, I joined the U.S. Border Patrol in the beautiful little town of Marfa, Texas. Little did I know at that time what a wonderful journey my young wife and I had in front of us that included stops in Chicago, El Paso, Brownsville, followed by 6 years in Manila, Philippines, before our transfer to Mexico, where we served for over 8 years at 3 different posts. From early in my career, I yearned to go after the criminal smugglers who profited from this immense business. In large part because of my background, but I also like to think that because of some ability, I was able to infiltrate and successfully target the biggest human smuggling operations ever broken up by our agency throughout the United States and in foreign countries. Throughout these undercover operations, I joined many of these migrants in their travels. I heard their stories, and I saw firsthand the risks that they took to get here. I met good ones, and I met bad ones. I came to know and arrest drivers, drop house operators, and coyotes, as the smugglers are called, who move the illegals, or pollos, across the border and around our country. I arrested many counterfeit document vendors, and I infiltrated numerous drug operations and successfully arrested the people behind it. Let me share with you a short segment on ABC News program Nightline that came out a few years ago. And this particular segment was actually produced in the year 2000, but it kind of gives you an idea where we were in the year 2000 and where we are today, and what has happened, and I'll come back and make some comments on that.
Tonight, human contraband, selling the American dream.
Can everybody hear me?
From ABC News. This is Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Cowell. Getting into the United States for people who aren't able to do it legally has turned into a massive business. Mexicans have, of course, been slipping across the border for years, but what we're talking about now is a whole new industry, as large, as corrupt, as profitable in its own way as the drug trade. Crime syndicates are charging exorbitant sums of money to bring people, first of all, from all around the world into Mexico, with the assurance that they will then get them across the border into the United States. There are, of course, no guarantees, so desperate would-be immigrants hand over thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars, only to end up in Mexican detention centers. It is a nasty business. It has become the world's back door into the United States.
We have some people from India, Chinese, Iraqis, Sierra Leone, all kind of nationalities. They sell the notion that Mexicans know they will do is sell across the borders.
It's almost as lucrative and far less risky than the drug trade.
International smuggling of men, women, and children is a big business.
What was the largest fee that you ever got? That he was drinking new people. And he needed $237,000.
And it's almost as brutal.
People being abandoned in the desert, people being placed in containers where they basically put that this money's not care about human life.
Tonight, human contraband, selling the American dream. The cat and mouse game between border agents and smugglers has become a fixture on the U.S.-Mexican border. Once again, here's ABC News correspondent Deborah Ames.
Hipolito Acosta has been chasing and catching smugglers for most of his professional career. Now the head of the U.S. Immigration and Naturalization Office in Mexico City. The pictures in his office are from his days as an undercover agent in the U.S.
I was proclaiming myself to be a smuggler at that time. This individual was associated with individuals that were smuggling Yugoslav aliens into Mexico, into the past Texas, San Antonio, and New York.
He also posed as an illegal migrant.
When I was stuck in the cab of a vehicle, I had desperation of wanting to get out. And it's a very scary feeling. And to not have your life in your hands.
He was smuggled from Tijuana to Chicago. Did you arrest the guys that smuggled you?
Oh yes, but that's what we did.
One of the most decorated agents in the history of the service, Acosta arrested many smugglers. This woman was one of them. Her career ended with her arrest and 18 months in a U.S. prison. We'll call her Rosa.
This is a business. This is a big business. This is a big money.
Let me ask how you started as a smuggler.
I had a friend in Mexico and he was trained in his city. Then there was Ferrari and then we went all the way to the border.
And he said, I could set you up in this business if you want to do it? Was it dangerous for you?
Sometimes, and sometimes, other times it was easy because since we pay good money to the officials in Mexico or in another country, they even go with you and take you.
These nationalities were Rosa's specialty, Indians and Pakistanis, because that is where the profits are. What was the largest fee that you ever got?
When he was drinking Hindu people. So we got them, okay, there is less. So the contact and Ecuador, like the system, how we move the people. And he needed $237,000.
Rosa even traveled to Moscow for her work. When you went to Moscow, were you working on smuggling Russians?
No. No. The Hindu people come to, sometimes they try to Japan, and from Japan to Moscow. Panama is the route for the Pakistani people. They come to them. Yes.
She was a link in an international system of people smuggling.
We have identified people all the way back to the originating countries like China, India, Pakistan.
Did people know that you were a successful smuggler, so they come looking for you? Yes, especially the husband. Because they said, that the main colors, they abuse the ladies. And I was a lady myself, so I won't abuse nobody. I took care of them.
But the smuggling business is a brutal business, where illegal migrants are put in danger at every step of the journey.
People being abandoned in the desert, people being placed in containers for long periods of time, where they basically cooked to death. A tanker that was retrofitted to put people inside the tanker, where it normally carried oil. People were placed inside the tanker up to 80 to 100 people at a time and transported for 26 hours. That's brutality.
And these people had no idea of the risks they would be taking.
I know some people too. You did? And I regret it. They were the boat? Yes. And it went over? Mm-hmm. How many? About 20. They were too sick when that happened. I was in Guatemala. I was thinking in my mind that they were I'm gonna feel them. Maybe tomorrow they show up. Maybe tomorrow they may come, but that tomorrow they came.
For all the risks, there are still desperate people willing to pay with a lifetime of savings and sometimes with their lives, because so many do make it across the U.S. border. It is still the Telpajan dream, even as he waits in this Mexican detention center to be deported to India.
Tonight, human contraband, selling the American dream.
So it kind of gives you an idea of what was going on back in the year 2000. There's a couple of important points here. You saw that lady that she mentioned. She was a main smuggler. I infiltrated her organization. I participated in approved undercover operations approved by the Department of Justice in smuggling Chinese, Pakistanis, Indians into the country. She was based here in Houston at one particular time. People were paying $30,000 to $40,000 to get smuggled into the United States. And you saw some of those conditions. The pictures that you saw in there were actually pictures that we took during the operations where we did interdictions outside the country. That's when I was an agent. But you might recall that she made a statement that's very strong. When Joanne Levine from ABC News asked her, did you ever lose anything? Did anybody die? And she said, I lost about 20. There's 20 people that drowned during one of her operations. This is before the incident in Victoria, Texas. And there was hardly any media coverage to it because it wasn't reported. This happened in the southern part of Mexico as they were bringing them on a boat. One of the small vessels capsized. They lost everybody, never found them. So you can imagine, when I talk about the human smuggling operation, how much trauma, how much emotion there is that goes into it for people trying to reach our country. As I mentioned before, I met a lot of these migrants on their way to the country. I met the good ones, I met the bad ones. Let me just share some, just a small number, because I think it's such an emotional issue. One of the families that I met was here in Houston, Texas. Mr. and Mrs. Esparza. They lost their only child who had come to the United States when she was 13 years old. She was the first female granted posthumous citizenship when she lost her life in Iraq. She had joined the military so she could continue her education after she graduated from high school. That was one of the good ones that I met. I met a young lady who was a child at the time in the back of a U-Haul. We were being transported to Chicago, Illinois. I was 12 years old. We were locked up in the back of a U-Haul as we were being transported. I was doing the undercover work on that particular case. And that young lady later on became an American citizen. And her son came to Rice University on a scholarship and was a graduate, and now he's in the field of education. Those are some of the good ones that you meet along the way. Then you meet some of the bad ones. I did an undercover case, a heroin undercover case on a gentleman by the name of Margarito Flores, who's still alive today. Margarito Flores had been arrested 16 times, but because of our generous judicial system sometimes, and you hear that from law enforcement officers, so that's my particular feeling. 16 times he had abused our laws, and he kept going back to the country. until he was arrested when he delivered 11 pounds of heroin to me, or to one of the other agents actually that I set up when I participated in the operation, and he ended up getting a 15-year prison term. What was the legacy that Margarito Flores left? He had two twin sons that were born 3 months after he was arrested and after he had been sentenced to 15 years. Those two sons are now 30 years old. They are in federal custody after being arrested for being the heads of the Sinaloa cartel in Chicago, Illinois. That was the legacy that Margarito Flores left for his family and for migrants. And again, so you have that emotion. You have the great ones. You have the family of Jose Hernandez, who came to this country and worked the migrant fields. And he went on to become an astronaut in our country. So that kind of gives you an idea. And I put that out because I know that it is such an emotional thing, and you deal with education, and those are the kids that we deal with each and every day. But at the end of the day, the important thing is that it's something that we need to bring forward, we need to discuss, we need to bring out in the open, and we need to look for a solution for what's best for the country. And that's my little political spill, and I'll move on to my topic. It's important to note that it didn't show on the video, but at the beginning of the video, when the program, the segment first started, Ted Koppel mentioned in 2000 or 2001 that President George Bush was considering granting amnesty to 3 million illegal Mexicans living in the United States. So we've gone from 2,000, 3 million illegal aliens to what we have now, estimates of 12 million people living inside the country. This is despite the fact that we increased our Border Patrol resources, our Border Patrol agents, to over 20,000 strong today. When I first came into the Border Patrol, we had 1,800 Border Patrol agents throughout the nation. But it gives you an idea that people have continued coming even with the increased resources. But let me go back to my original career days when I started as a young agent in Marfa, and then I moved on to Chicago, where I found it very frustrating that arrests of individuals being smuggled from the southern border to Chicago were simply processed, removal proceedings initiated, while the smugglers were generally allowed to plead guilty to a misdemeanor offense. While the low-level drivers faced some form of judicial action, the heads of the smuggling organizations were for the most part safe in Mexico or along the southern border. Our tactics in enforcement and pursuing them were for the most part very stale and completely ineffective. Although I was a new agent, a young agent with very limited experience, I, for one, wanted a more aggressive strategy from our agency. Luckily for me, I feel I have been selected for the right place of assignment, as we would soon be undertaking in Chicago missions that had never been done by our agency in its history. Just a few months after reporting to Chicago, I learned that our agency was investigating a notorious human smuggler and counterfeit document vendor by the name of Newton Van Drunen, a Canadian-born American citizen who had long been in criminal activities. Van Drunen had also been in jail, in a Mexican jail at one time, on suspicion of having killed 2 of his clients he was to smuggle into the country. He had become the premier provider of counterfeit documents to illegal aliens throughout the United States, with distributors, with 40 distributors, ranging from Chicago all the way to California. He had become so proficient a counterfeit document vendor that when he was arrested, he was actually called up to testify before a U.S. Senate hearing. Ironically, reports are that Mr. Van Drunen learned the counterfeiting business, the printed business, while in prison for human smuggling. Despite a multi-agency effort, the investigation of Van Drunen had not been successful, partly because of the fear he instilled in his subordinates, and informants who knew Van Drunen were generally not inclined to report him because of this. Prior to this case, I had absolutely no undercover experience or training. But in speaking with an informant I developed shortly after my arrival in Chicago, I proposed that I move in with this informant and several of his roommates into a 2-bedroom basement apartment on the near north side of Chicago and become a distributor of Mr. Van Drunen. Only the informant knew that I was an agent. The other 4 living there did not. To my surprise, the head of the investigations branch in Chicago approved what was to become my first undercover case and would begin my undercover career. On a personal level, it was not easy for my 17-year-old wife, who had to stay alone in our little apartment on the near north side with our little baby. Numerous times I would sneak out at 2 o'clock in the morning to see my wife and son for a couple of hours. Van Drunen had such control over his distributors that I had to play along and be available when he showed up unannounced and at odd hours. I praised my wife, and I'll take a few seconds to say this. I praised my wife because without her support then and throughout my career, it would have been so much more difficult, and I don't know I would have had the success that I had. And normally my wife accompanies me because she's with my son in San Antonio, but she has been married to me for over 39 years. Despite my limited experience and time with the agency, the successful operation on Van Drunen gave me a reputation as a daring, innovative agent with access to our upper management, federal prosecutors, and a trust by other agents. And I was called to Washington, D.C. to testify before House Judiciary Committee. That was more scary than meeting some of the criminals, by the way. Thus, when I proposed that I travel into Mexico to target a Ciudad Juarez-based human smuggling operation, my request was approved. Never in the history of our agency had an agent gone into Mexico to be smuggled all the way from Ciudad Juarez to Chicago alone. Perhaps it was fate that put me in that path as a driver of the U-Haul. Perhaps it was fate that put me in the path as the driver of that U-Haul we were being transported and got lost in North Texas during a snowstorm. And he had thoughts of abandoning the human cargo in the back, which included several minor children, including the 12-year-old young lady that I spoke about. My being there possibly prevented a tragedy similar to what occurred in Victoria, Texas, many years later, when 19 migrants died in the back of a tractor trailer after being abandoned by their driver. My undercover operations continued in Chicago, including another journey that resulted in me being smuggled from Tijuana, Baja California, Mexico to Chicago. That included being stuffed in the trunk of a 1968 Nova with a 16-year-old young man from El Salvador who was en route to San Francisco in search of his parents who he had not seen for 5 years. And I mentioned that because it's pretty similar to what we saw last summer with young children coming into the United States and South Texas, trying to reach their parents who had left them behind. Other cases included working undercover in the largest heroin case up to that time in Chicago. I arrested dozens of counterfeit document vendors and ultimately was transferred to El Paso, Texas because of alleged threats in my life in Chicago. While moving up through the management ranks, I continued initiating, performing, and supervising undercover criminal investigations throughout the United States, Latin America, and the Caribbean. And while I will not go into other successful operations, before moving on to my second topic, I would like to mention two that were especially significant for our agency and our country. In my younger days, I have been successful in getting Mexico-based smugglers prosecuted in the United States, generally by convincing them to meet me on our side of the border. But in 1997, I took it one step further by going into Nicaragua. Working with their Interpol branch, I successfully brought to our country two major human smugglers who felt they were beyond the reach of human enforcement. This operation would have a major impact on our efforts in going after heads of human smuggling operations throughout the Western Hemisphere. Captains and crews of ships used for large-scale operations found themselves before U.S. courts, including one case where more than 200 Chinese migrants were being smuggled into the United States at a cost of $45,000 each. Prosecutions were not limited to U.S. courts, as we worked closely with foreign governments in using their laws to go after these criminals. In a 12-country initiative titled Operation Crossroads International, led by our agency while I was head of the INS office at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, 7,981 intended illegal entrants were interdicted before they reached the U.S. border and returned safely to their country in a 20-day operation. This is especially important because the operation resulted in removing from harm's way many of those en route to the United States. And I mention that because you might recall just a few years back, 72 intended illegal migrants were executed south of Matamoros by the cartel as they were being smuggled into the United States. Those are the dangers that they face now, and those were the dangers they faced when I was an agent. My final undercover operation was in 1998, 23 years after I had started as a federal law enforcement officer. And he saw me working undercover throughout Latin America and the Caribbean, posing as a Mexican rancher with a private jet. The case, described in a press conference by our commissioner and the U.S. Attorney General as the biggest one in our history, was significant as well, as this was the first case that our agency had used money laundering statutes in going after the heads of the criminal enterprises. We went after their assets. This was also the first wiretap case that had ever been done by our agency. I'm also proud to say that this was 23 years after I had started as a law enforcement officer, and my young son, who was a baby in Chicago, himself was now a law enforcement officer as well. Let me switch over. I could talk about undercover cases all day long, but I think the important thing is I wanted to bring forward a topic that I think is extremely important, as I mentioned earlier, immigration today. I believe our country needs to be open with frank discussions on immigration, a field that I've worked in for 30 years. As most of us know, the topic is and will continue to be a huge polarizing issue in our country, and one that has a tremendous impact in your profession and our community in general. According to news reported by Price, the Houston Independent School District reported an increase of over 3,000 students as a result of the recent influx of unaccompanied minors last summer. Was the influx handled correctly by our government in allowing the children and their relatives to stay in the country? Were enforcement initiatives started too late? And what is the impact on our communities and our schools? I truly believe those are very viable concerns. You all might have seen a recent front page article in the Houston article that reported that the border search of children was over. It said no more crisis. More than 60,000 young children flooded our South Texas border, but while the attention was focused on them, the reality was that for the most part, most of them had not been traveling alone, as reports indicate. During the same time period, almost 100,000 other aliens were interdicted by the U.S. Border Patrol, or simply turned themselves in when they knew there wasn't enough detention facilities to hold them, or that permits were being issued so they could continue to interior cities of the United States. What impact does this have on us? 2 weeks ago, I returned from Honduras, where I was working on a security matter with a private agency. And the amount of crime going on in Honduras, the lack of education opportunities, the split families with many living in the United States, the gangs, the narcotics trafficking, all are major impacts. How much is that having an impact on our country when we have reports that indicate that more than 1,500 children from Honduras came from the during the search and are actually going to school in Houston. So those are concerns we need to be aware of. The coverage, and even some political leaders made it appear as if this search was a new event and had not happened before. Let me share with you what I have been telling the media, our representatives, and the public. This type of activity has been going on for decades. I mentioned earlier that since the year 2000, the undocumented population has gone from 3 million to 12 million despite the increased border security and resources. Has anyone in our leadership figured out why this has happened? Statements that play well to our certain audiences are generally the response from our leaders, more so now than ever. They include statements such as this: we will not address immigration until our borders are secure, or our immigration system is broken, and so on. In the meantime, illegal aliens continue making their way into our country in search of a better future. They travel in overloaded buses, on the tops of trains, in cargo bays of fishing trawlers, inside 18-wheelers, and trust their lives to coyotes who cross them into the United States. The notorious cartels, which we read so much about, or crooked police, gangs, robbery, rape, and murder are all risks along the way. Reaching the U.S. border does not relieve the risks, as gangs trained on the tired and worn-out travelers often try to collect one more tariff, and in many cases, even in Houston, are held against their will in stash houses as criminals try to collect even more money from their relatives. Even if they reach their final destination, they are not secure. They need to purchase fake documents in order to gain employment, and even then, they remain at the mercy of sometimes abusive, exploitive employers. Let me share my thoughts that there is an answer as to why. As long as the migrants are able to obtain employment, they will continue to seek that better way of life. The Immigration Reform and Control Act of 1986 was passed under President Ronald Reagan. The administration did not get it right then, and I will offer my opinion that the present administration is not getting it right either. The president's action does not constitute immigration reform, as we saw a couple of weeks ago, but it may force Congress into taking action on the matter, which has not been done. Interior enforcement was negligible then, and throughout the decades, and the recent executive order by President Obama is more of the same, thus repeating the cycle. While it will be a benefit to possibly several million individuals living in the shadows, it is also a magnet that will continue to attract those who can obtain employment through the use of counterfeit documents or simply through employers willing to take a chance because of our lack of immigration enforcement. There are several other similarities between the recent executive order and the position of the administration under President Reagan. Then and now, the U.S. was not going to deport millions living in the shadows, so the question becomes, what do we do? And is there a solution? The reality is that the answer is yes. The immigration system is not broken. It is our leadership that has come together and do what is in the best interest of our country. Let me open it up because I put some real strong words out there. I'd really like to hear from you all because you all are involved in our community in a field that's extremely important. I'd like to, before closing up, I'd like to open it up for questions, your thoughts, comments, suggestions, criticisms. Yes, sir.
What, in your opinion, what is the solution to the matter?
Say it again.
In your opinion, what is the solution to this problem? What would you do if you were president? Or what would you do if you were in charge of making a difference?
Well, you know, I made a very strong statement. In 1986, President Reagan, who, by the way, I truly admire, came up with a thought, and our leaders, that we had several million people in the country that were here illegally, and there was no way we were going to deport them. You know, at that time, the estimates were that we had 3 million people. We were not going to round them up, we were not going to deport them, so it was going to have a major impact on our community. So President Reagan and his staff came up with a solution for the Immigration Reform and Control Act. It granted amnesty and it granted legal resident status to almost 3 million people. Now, estimates are that we have 11.7 or 12.1, depending on who you listen to, people living in the shadows, illegally in the country. My thoughts are that we're not going to deport them. We know that. We're not going to round them up and get them out of the country. So we need to find an immigration solution, but it cannot be amnesty. My proposal would be, and I drafted up and I've shared this with some of our congressional leaders, is that we need to do what we call an immigration solution. Number one, grant a temporary permit for people who qualify under certain criteria for 10 years. Number two, people broke the law when they came to the country illegally or overstayed their visas, because not everybody who's here in the country illegally actually crossed the southern border. They came in with visas issued by the State Department and simply stayed. So what we have to do is we have to adjudicate that criminal offense first. And I would propose that the fine for entering the country illegally is actually only $500 for entry without inspection. My proposal would be that we fine them twice as much, $1,000. So we eliminate that issue of whether it's amnesty or not. Number two, we issue a temporary permit for 10 years. And it's only temporary. During that period of time, the individual should not be involved in any criminal activity. They need to pay taxes. It must not avail of social benefits if they are able to work unless under emergencies. And after 10 years, they will have earned the right to apply for legal residence status. After 10 years. They will not be eligible to become U.S. citizens until 15 years down the road. There's always the notion that's put out by individuals that say everybody needs to get in the back of the line. We need to get away from those statements. The reality, there's no line, but that's a political saying because that's a way of justifying not taking any action. So we go through that, no social benefits, no criminal record, paying the taxes, becoming a good member of the community, having been in the country this period of time. That's the only solution we have at this point. Plus, the important thing, the final thing is that employers need to be held accountable. We don't have interior enforcement in the United States. When we talk about securing the border, we have 23,000 Border Patrol agents. When our leaders say we're going to double the Border Patrol agents, we have stations in the Border Patrol, and I know because like I said, Border Patrol agents are standing around because there's so many of them. We need to take that force into the interior of the United States and enforce immigration law. We've never done that. And our political leaders don't want to do that either.
So can I follow up with a
Please.
question? So that's what you would do with the ones that are here. How do we keep our borders secure from more people coming in?
When an employer knows that he's going to be criminally prosecuted and fined, they won't hire them. People won't come to the country if they cannot find a job. I can guarantee you. If they can find a job, we can build a wall. And I'll share a story with you. I was smuggled from Ciudad Juarez to Albuquerque, New Mexico at one point with a lady that was 8.5 months pregnant. We walked across the mountains for 10 hours. And I kept thinking, I was an agent, I have a responsibility because if she goes into labor, I have to call in a helicopter. And I kept saying, you want to stop, you want to stop? She said, no, we got to make it, we got to make it, we got to make it. Why? Because she knew that once she made it to Chicago, she was home safe.
Why Chicago?
Because that's where she was going. That's where her relatives lived. There was a magnet. Her relatives were working in Chicago. They were working. They were paying for a smuggler to bring her into the country. So, and I use that as an example because that's how much of an effort she was going to make to get there, regardless of how much border resources we had. And so, you know, if we have interior enforcement, one of our congressmen said we're going to double the Border Patrol force. Really go from 23,000 to 46,000? How about taking 10,000 and just putting them in New York, Chicago, Dallas, Houston, and every investigation that results in an employer hiring illegal aliens, come up with a fine with criminal prosecution, and believe me, they will stop. I know that. IFCO Corporation here in Houston paid $21.5 million in fines for using an illegal workforce.
How much?
$21.5 million. And they're still in business. You know why? Because they were profiting tremendously from the salaries that they kept down, and they were using their workforce. And they continued even after they were raided and more than 1,200 illegal aliens were arrested in 2006 throughout the country. Now, 5 of their executives were taken to court. Unfortunately, they were allowed to plead guilty to misdemeanor charges, but they have a criminal conviction. I doubt that they would do it again. So that's my simple solution. I didn't interrupt you. Thoughts? Come on, you guys give me some thoughts. I know that. Don't be afraid. It's not being recorded anymore. Well, look, I'm going to be here. I have a lot of. I have a strong opinion about immigration, and it's kind of unusual in the sense. When I was the director, you know, we have. I was very fortunate. We only had 33 districts throughout the United States, and becoming director of one of them didn't pay as much, but I equated similar to becoming a major league manager. There was only a limited number of positions there, so it took a long career to get there, and you generally had to wait until somebody died or retired before they were opened up again. But I was very, very fortunate, and I'm very proud of having reached that level. But I was also, you know, I did not mind expressing my opinions, and I know that there was some of my fellow directors would say, well, you know, we can't have any type of reform. And my question will always be, well, I agree. My role as an enforcement officer in throughout 30 years was say, look, if somebody breaks the law, let's arrest them. If somebody is in the country illegally, let's deport them. But if our Congress and if our leaders do not support that, we just can't have what I call a blanket amnesty, because that's what we have right now. When we have 12 million people living in the shadows and we take no action, what are we doing? When we have 3 million people that are using counterfeit documents and their children at home under a different name can apply for social benefits, who is it hurting? It's hurting our country. Yes, sir.
You address, you know, in terms of folks that are here. I'm a big proponent of just immigration overall because our interior, our birth rates are down, and you know, I do think we need more people to continue to grow. All right. So how do you make it easier for people to get in legally? What should be done in that regard?
You know, you might be aware that we actually admit a lot of people into our country every year. There's a process. We have immediate relative petitions, family petitions, we have employment-based petitions, we have temporary worker categories. So there's a mechanism. Now, mind you, all of you will know that our government bureaucracy is horrific in terms of the process. I know that you all don't have that problem in your particular industry, but and I'll give you an example. If you file an H-2B petition to bring in a temporary non-agricultural worker, you must first file for what's called a wage labor determination to find out what the prices are. After you do that, you file with the Department of Labor for a labor certificate. After that gets approved, then you go with, oh, by the way, you have to make an announcement in a newspaper so that people who don't have a job, who qualify for that position, can be interviewed, and they must be offered the position first. Secondly, after you get the Department of Labor approval, you have to go to Citizenship and Immigration Services, and that could be another 30 days before you get the results. So we need to make that a better process. But the laws are there. There are certain categories that I think we need to expand on. But we have professional categories, we have educative categories, we have business categories. I think the biggest thing is that we need to enforce immigration law, and everything else will end. Question? Awesome. Okay, well, if you guys don't have any comments, I thank you so much. Again, I'm a little bit opinionated, but I appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, I can see I forgot to update the very first slide. I hope nobody was there at the TASB annual conference September 27th, because you're going to be kind of bored to see this again. Anyway. This is a quick rundown of the agenda we're going to go through today. We're going to do an overview of what the summary of finances looks like. We're going to review the settlement that we've just done for our 2014 year final. Kind of take a look at the payment ledgers. We're going to review a new document we have which outlines state funding data sources and timelines, which I think is going to be very helpful for everybody. We're going to do a quick state facilities funding update, Chapter 41 update, talk about what you need to do to access the FSP system through the TEAS secure system. We're going to talk about closing out 2014 and beginning our 2015 school year, which we've actually already done. Then we're going to talk a little bit about what the next biennium might look like. And we're going to talk about property value growth and decline statewide. So the first part is we're going to talk about the summary of finances, which is the main document that we produce online, which helps everybody figure out how their state funding is figured out. I put the URL on that screen because with the new TEA website, it takes quite a few clicks to get through the summary of finances, so you might want to bookmark that URL. It's much easier to get to the summary of finances that way. So this is what the summary looks like for 2015. I don't know if you're all very familiar with it. We have the two columns there, the LPE column and the DPE column, which are important to know what they stand for. LPE standing for Legislative Payment Estimate, which is the payments that you'll get paid on during the year. And DPE being the District Payment Estimate, what we think is going to be your most likely earnings when we do settle up at the end of the year. There's also a couple of important things which are important to note. So you can see the payment cycle up there where it says preliminary. That has gone to near final. It will say near final or final. There's 3 payment cycles. The district's payment class is in the middle, which controls when you get paid and how much you get paid during the year. And then on the right-hand side, every time we do a new calculation run in the SOF, it creates a run ID. And so that's a useful way to communicate with us about any changes you might want to discuss, because it helps us go right away to that run ID that you're seeing, something that you might feel is wrong. So a quick overview of the difference between LPE, Legislative Payment Estimate, and DPE. The Legislative Payment Estimate is all about controlling the amount of money that goes out during the year so that it fits in with the money that was appropriated in the legislative session, the biennium. We make payments to school districts based on estimated student counts and property tax collections, and we try and keep those pretty much unchanged for the biennium so that we know how much money it's going to cost us. These estimates are depicted on the SOF as the LPE column. The data are based on assumptions made during the legislative process, and school districts have the opportunity to influence these estimates by completing your pupil projections in October of even-numbered years. So you need to be doing those right now. It closes on December 15th if anybody needs to get their pupil projections in. LPE calculations, we do allow them to change just for a very limited number of reasons. If you have adopted a new tax rate in the year, and we get that from the comptroller's self-report, and we bring that into the LPE in January, and we'll recalculate your collections, and that will influence your payments during the rest of the year. Transportation and compensatory education data that become available after the first preliminary summary of finances in October gets incorporated. Changes in the ASF rate. State Board of Education sets the ASF rate, I think, in September or October, and then again in July, and that will affect your foundation payments. We do allow people to request ADA reductions. If you feel like you're going to get a big overpayment, we're happy to reduce your ADA and reduce your payments during the year. And under rare circumstances, we will do ADA upward adjustments, but in those circumstances, we need to have, it needs to be a hardship waiver, and you need to establish a hardship and send in a cash flow statement showing 3 months of negative cash flow. And finally, this is the report that you get to at the bottom of the summary of finances, and it's kind of what LPE and DPE is all about, because it tells you what your likely projected settle-up is going to be. I don't know if you can see well, but in this case, Zapata County has a different DPE than their LPE, and at the very bottom there, you can see that their DPE payments are projected to be higher, so they can actually expect, on line 7, a projected settle-up amount of $337,000, which they would get in September. So that's really good to keep track of that report during the year and see whether you're going to be in a negative or positive settle-up at the end of the year. Which segues us into settle-up, which occurs in 2 phases: near final, which is the big one, and final. In September of each year, once we get the summer teams, the final teams in, and your tax information survey data, then we run the near final, and that at that point, what's in the DPE column becomes what your payments will be made of, and we settle up the balance. The SOF fund would create an allotment that is either higher or lower than the amount paid to the district during the course of the school year, and then we'll either send an adjustment over into the following school year if it's negative, or make a payment if it's positive. Final settle-up occurs in the spring, in March and April, and that's when we get your final tax collections from the J1 schedule. Usually it's a minor adjustments, like $40 million either way. So to compute the settle-up amount, we run the near final summary. Like I said, if we need to make a payment to you, we send that payment out right away. And if the settle-up amount is negative, it gets transferred to the subsequent school year, and it's going to gradually affect all of the payments made in that school year. Here's an example of a positive settle-up. I don't know if you can see in the corner there. You can see on where we ran the August foundation on 7/24, sorry, that was the July. It's a foundation allotment, $1.42 million. That was the last LPE foundation allotment run during that year. And then once we come along to 905, the first near final one is run, and you can see it goes up to $1.5 million. We run a couple more near finals, and then sort of in mid-September, we see what the remaining balance is, $85,000, and in this case, that district would receive that as a payment. Now this one's a negative settlement example. You can see once again on 24th of July, the foundation allotment was $1.12 million. It was their LPE estimates. When we ran their final, it had gone down to $461,000. Creates a deficit of $664,000 on the very right-hand column there. So we roll that over to the 2015 ledger and then make a corresponding adjustment in the 2014 ledger to zero it out. This is just showing the 2015 ledger, I believe. So you can see that the negative adjustment rolls in there. The remaining balance goes down from $1.1 million, which was their estimate before we ran their final, to $400,000. And so the payments during the year will just be based on that small $400,000 remaining balance. In rare cases, if we have a negative settle-up amount that exceeds what your foundation is going to be for the subsequent year, we'll have to ask you for the money back. We had a lot last year because of being kind of allowing these negative settle-up amounts to roll, but we pretty much brought it all back in. So letters for districts that were in that situation have already been sent out, and the TEA requires a payment to be made. We also have some districts who are no longer getting IFA or EDA because essentially they're kind of growing out of the program by having too much wealth to be eligible for the guarantee. If there are any negative balances rolled to those ledgers for 2014 and you're not going to get IFA or EDA in that year to pay us, then we're going to ask either for a payment to be sent into TDA or we're going to reduce the foundation payments. We're going to send out those letters shortly. So, we always recommend that you run local estimates for what your DPE column is going to be like, so don't just trust in our DPE column. You guys probably have better information about what your DPE is going to look like, what your settle-up is going to look like on both the ADA and collections fronts. Always be prepared for the cash flow consequences of what's really going to happen when we bring in the near final data. And use the FSP payment ledger to monitor your payments throughout the year. Okay, we put a document onto the web which discusses the data sources and timelines for all the data elements we use in the summary. It's very useful to know when we start incorporating different things at different times, and then you can understand what's making your allocations change during the year. This is the new link to it on our new website. You go to that page, Summary of Finances, and then you'll find this Data Element Sources and Timelines document on that page. This is what the new TEA website looks like. If you go to, on the top line, I don't know if you guys have been using it much, it's about 3 weeks old. There's a link to Finance and Grants. You go directly down from there, and then Summary of Finances. So the document looks like this. It's a matrix to help districts understand what the data elements are and how they change where we source them from during the year. That's what it looks like in reality. There's some bigger examples of the kind of things that we use. See, average daily attendance, support funding driver. On the LPE side, it's going to be based on the pupil projections submitted to TEA at the beginning of each biennium. So right now, your 2015 payments are being based on ADA projections that you did in late 2012. DPE, we keep the same as LPE until March of each year when we get the PEMS enrollment data. And then we adjust the DPE data to reflect what your PEMS enrollment looks like. Gives you, once you do that, you get some idea of what your settle up might look like. And near final, we use the summer PEMS, and then final, there's no change rate. Property values have gotten complicated.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
What drivers or factors do you use to change the LPE during the second year of time, if any?
Well, you're stuck with your ADA projections that you made before.
Yeah.
And by the time we've gotten to 2015, we do know what your 2013 property values are. And we're kind of,
And that's primarily the property values is what I'm.
yeah, so we know what the 2013 values are, but we do, in the second year of the biennium, I'm going to go into it in this column here, when the legislature makes the appropriation, they use some assumptions about what property value growth is going to be, and we stick to those. And so we make it that it's either going to be your 2013 real CPTD value, or if that is less than the 2012 value times the growth percentage, 4% it was this year.
That's a 4%?
Yep. Then we give you that higher value, even though that's not what you might have. And that can cause some hardship to districts, but that's what we're instructed to do in statute. On the DPE side, so that's kind of what I went through on the LP side. On the DPE side, the actual final values are used, so you can see if we're hitting you with that requirement on the LPE. Tax collections is the other big driver. It's kind of done similarly to the property values. We use the growth rates used in the appropriation process. And then the second year of the biennium, once again, we give you the greater of your PEMS budgeted collections from 2014 times the 4.03%, the growth factor used in the appropriations process, or your 2013 times 4.03%. So once again, we're kind of sticking it to districts a little bit. DPE side is updated in March with your PEMS budgeted tax collections. When you consider that we will then use those PEMS budgeted tax collections to be the collections used for LPE in the next year, it is really important to take those seriously and try and get them right. In near final, we use what you submitted in the tax collection survey in August. And at final, we actually use the J1 schedule, your audited tax collection. On to state facilities funding. We have two programs to provide state support for facilities programs helping with your bonded indebtedness. The IFA, Instructional Facilities Allotment, and the EDA. The IFA assists districts in making payments on qualifying bonds, which have to be made through an application process to TEA. We open up rounds depending on if the legislature allocates money for it, and you can apply to get assistance for bonds under IFA through that process. If you refund your IFA bonds, which everybody has done many times, you need to submit a refunding amendment to us within 180 days of the refund. It's not like we then never let you back into IFA if you don't do that. But if we don't have an amendment, then we don't provide state aid on that bond. Now you can tell what it looks like. If you want to know if you're in this situation, go to the IFA detail report, which you get from the same drop-down menu as the summary of finances on. And if you see something that looks like the bond circled here, where the state share of that bond which is 82,658, the 2013 bond, is 0 and there's an asterisk next to it. That means that we have not got an amendment from you for that bond, and so you're not getting any state assistance on that bond. So you need to get your FA to get us an IFA refunding amendment done. I have a few slides about the implications of reduced INS tax collections, because we've finally hit the point where districts which have done tax swaps and are not collecting enough INS tax collections are being hit with reduced state aid for their bonded indebtedness, and that was a shock to some people. IFA and EDA are guaranteed yield funding programs, and we don't want to provide a state match on the same tax collections under the two different programs. We require that it's a state match, so we require that the district meets its taxing obligations to get its makes its full local share before we provide full state share. Now we do have this bank of what we call unequalized local collections, and it's been adding up for 20 years or so for a lot of districts. So any M&O collections in prior years which are above the local share for districts that did not receive ASATR funding, and INS tax collections in prior years which are above the local share of IFA or EDA. We have this big spreadsheet of how much each district has in unequalized local collections. You can find it on our website. It gets updated every year after the final SOF. So if you're in the situation where you're not meeting your local share of IFA and EDA, we will add, to the extent that we can, anything that's in your bank of unequalized collections to your district's INS tax collections, and we can apply that to make your local share. But if you have run out of unequalized collections and you're not taxing enough to meet your local share, then we prorate down what you get under the IFA and EDA programs. And we have some districts that basically have just tax swapped out their entire INS collections, and they're now not really getting any assistance under IFA and EDA anymore. Where can you see your local share of the IFA, what you need to be taxing in? Once again, it's on the IFA detail report page, and we have the local share being the rightmost column there, and you can see that this district, the local share that they would need to meet with their own INS collections in that year is $973,000. The local share of EDA, you can see it on the EDA report, which comes off of the summary of finances. See on line 14, local share of EDA for this district, $797,000. Little discussion on state aid under EDA. Now that we have not had an IFA around since 2011, it's important, if you want to get full access to EDA funding, that you make a payment on that bond during the second fiscal year of the state biennium. So if you want to get full access to EDA in 2016, it's important that in 2015 you make a sufficient payment on that bond to make up your local share. So if you get 50% of your funding for those bonds from the state, you would want to make a payment on that bond of around 50% of the debt service you expect to be paying in 2016 and 2017. That would make sure that you get your full EDA funding. So once again, this discussion of keeping your tax effort up so it doesn't limit EDA funding. And we have, unfortunately, there's a maximum of 29 cents that will equalize up to, and a lot of districts are well in excess of that these days. Quick Chapter 41 update. This year we notified 415 districts, getting close to being half of all districts notified of Chapter 41 status.
Before you want to focus, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
You mentioned about making a payment prior to September 1 in the last year of the biennium
Mhm.
we're in. And it needs to be at least 50%.
If you're a district that is a 50-50 split on how you pay your bonds,
What is that?
so if the guaranteed yield level is $35 per ADA, right, for ADA. And so if you have enough wealth that you're at $17.50 rate EDA, then that's what I mean. You would get 50% of the assistance on that bond from the state, and 50% would be local. And so you need to figure out what your local share of the EDA is as a percentage, and then that would be the percentage. So the 50% is like an example.
So, okay, so then you can't just make an interest payment of $300,000 or $400,000 in August, and then all that would be eligible for the EDA?
You could if that meets your full local share.
Okay.
So it depends on what your local share is. So if the $300,000 or $400,000 was your local share, if you're a poor district, then that does work. So you just got to figure out what your local share of it needs to be and make a payment around that. So.
And if you don't, then you make it just a smaller portion, you're going to be limited on how much you're going to be eligible for the next time.
Yeah, because we use that rate as one of the limitations on the EDA. Okay, there were 356 districts that remain Chapter 41 after we received the final property values, and districts let us know whether they were charging tuition to students that they were educating from outside the district. With the property growth that we have had the last couple of years, recapture is rocking up towards $1.4 billion, up from just close to $1 billion just a couple of years ago. All districts with an equalized wealth level greater than $319,500 have to be identified as Chapter 41, even if you don't have any tax effort in that third tier, which we equalized to $319,500. And you need to tell TPA if you have been identified how you intend to equalize your wealth. The intent process is now online, but the contracts we still require paper copies. It's important to note that not all districts that are identified as Chapter 41 end up owing any recapture, particularly those that we identify based on you being more wealthy than $319,500 and you don't have any tax effort in that tier, you're not going to owe any recapture. If your district became Chapter 41 for the first time after 2006-07, and you owe less in recapture than you get in FSP Chapter 42 funding, you can choose to net recapture against your 42 funding. You don't have to hold an election. And so it really simplifies the process for everybody. If you just owe a small amount of recapture, then you can net it against the 42 payments. Quick talk about accessing the FSP system through T's. I know this is challenging for everybody. It's kind of challenging for me also. All districts need access to the FSP system modules to put your data in. We've got a lot of modules. We've got attendance projections, we have the bond programs, Chapter 41, charter schools, NIFA, which has gone away, which may be back, state compensatory education, staff salary module, tax information survey, and transportation. All need to have their own T's user and then typically district approver to approve those data feeds. The data you submit through the system affects your state aid payments and recapture. The modules are all set up to need a user who submits the data to the approver, and then the approver has to approve it before it can go to TPA in submitted status. That's typically where things get held up, yes.
Did I hear you a minute ago say funding for the new instructional facility allotment may be coming back?
No. We did request it in the LAR, but the legislature has to make the appropriation for that. It was, yeah. I don't know what they would do. Okay, so it's the approval status where we typically find that people's submissions get held up. They think that they've submitted it to TEA, but it hasn't been approved by your district approver, and so we do not get it until it's been approved. So we recommend that your staff check the T's access periodically, make sure that you don't have any old staff on there with these important roles, make sure that the staff who will now be responsible for it have the right role, and making sure that the major submissions are completed and approved on time. Yes?
The FSP staff salary submissions that are supposed to be done monthly, do you actually look at them monthly, or do you wait until finals?
The important thing is to get it done at the end, yeah. So these are some of the T's deadlines. Tax information survey has to be completed by the end of August. It's very important to get that right, to get your near final right. ADA projections is going to close on December 15th this year. Every even numbered year we have to do these, and those, once again, are also very important because it's going to control your LPD payments for the next 2 years. Transportation, we have 2 reports. Route services, which needs to be done by August 1st, and operations, which needs to be completed by December 1st. If you haven't gotten your operations report completed, it's not going to be a huge big deal. Just try and you can still go in there and submit it. Just try and get it in there. And staff salary, like we just discussed, it's not important to get it in during the year, but it is important to have it in before August. And if we don't get that by final, we zero it out, and we're going to roll those zeros into 2015 LPD. So a little bit about what it was like closing out 2014. We had $360 million in negative adjustments, typically because people's tax collections were bigger than we estimated. We rolled those over to 2014 to reduce the current year payments for those districts. We paid out $270 million in positive balances in October. Average daily attendance, we were basing the LPD payments on 4.799 students, and the near final we got to 4.780. So very, very, very close. But district by district, there was some pretty big variations. The state grows pretty reliably at around 1.7% every year. M&O tax collections, that we estimate that nearly as well. LPE payments are based on 18.8 billion in collections, and by the time we got the near final survey, it was 19.4, to 3% higher than forecast. A lot stronger property growth than the comptroller was anticipating. Final setup in April will incorporate your final tax collections from your J1 audit schedule, the staff salary data, any transportation data that we didn't get in time for near final. So make sure your data is in submitted and approved status. This is just a quick look at what where the money came from to fund 2014 FSP. The big blue piece of the pie and the red piece of the pie really can be added together. They kind of come out of the general fund, the foundation formula, and the property tax relief fund, which was set up in 2007 to fund the tax compression. The green slice is Chapter 41 recapture. We call that appropriated receipts. The purple slice is the lottery, and then the light blue slice being the available school fund.
Do you happen to know what the lottery number is?
It's around $1 billion.
Per year or for the bank?
Per year.
So it's 2 billion for the,
Yeah. So we get a lot of questions about, I thought the lottery was going to fund schools, but it's just a little. This is what it looks like in 2015 for LPE, 18.4 billion in FSP, state aid, 1.2 billion from the available school fund, 312 million in EDA, and 224 million in IFA. EDA and IFA assistance are slipping down every year because districts are just growing out of those programs. They're too low. So your 2015 LPE estimates are based on the ADA projections you submitted in October of 2012. Assumes 4.03% value growth, which is what the comptroller estimated would be the value growth when they did these estimates also back in late 2012. So we're adjusting the 2013 CPD values like we discussed. We're using them unless the 2013 is less than the 2012 times 1.0403. There are some districts who've had significant property value loss, and this can hurt them quite badly because we're just not recognizing that loss on the LPE side. We'll update your M&O tax rates. If you've had an increase or decrease in M&O tax rates, we get that data from the self-report in January, February. And then we also recalculate your tax collections at that time. This year we have the one-time 330 million rider for the TRS contribution. It's currently set at around $67 per ADA. And we just, we'll let that adjust at near final to keep it within the appropriation. It has to be exactly 330 million. And the ASF rate adopted was $257. These are the funding elements that were adopted by the legislature for this biennium. See that the basic allotment's now $5,040 in 2014-15. Tier 1 equalized wealth level is kind of in sync with that. Tier 2 equalized wealth level hasn't changed in 7 years or so. The Austin yield, the golden penny yield, $61.86. We actually have a pretty good idea what that's going to be for the next biennium. It's probably going to jump up to $73 for 2016 and then $78 for 2018. Copper penny yield, still the same as ever, and target revenue adjustment factor at 0.9263. That's how they're keeping the ASATR payments down, which is scheduled to go away in 2017. So this is what it looks like with ASATR. In 2009, we were paying out $4 billion in ASATR. Now we're down to $314 million. Scheduled to go away in 2017 once again. The supplemental pre-K funding, we just sent out payments, was $15 million appropriated statewide. So we base that on your near final pre-K ADA numbers, distributed about $147 per pre-K ADA. The funds come in a lump sum amount. It's not part of the summary of finances, and it's not subject to settle up. So preparing for the next biennium, which is kind of what we're doing at the moment. Our LAR request, estimated cost of FSP, $39 billion for M&O and $1.26 billion for facilities over the biennium. The estimated value growth the comptroller just came up with is 8.6% for tax year 2014, and they're estimating another 5.7% for tax year 2015. Our rule of thumb is typically that 4% property value growth will pay for the ADA growth that we get. So unless the legislature takes some action, the cost of FSP will be going down with those kind of property value growth rates. Estimated enrollment growth is going to be 1.7%. We were asked to run the 2015 FSP using the 2011 formula funding elements, and we have actually finally gotten out of that hole. We're exceeding just slightly what people were being funded out in 2011. But there's a huge variation. There's a lot of districts which are benefiting a lot, have made them getting quite a lot more than they were in 2011. And then there's quite a lot that are actually getting less. Those would be the ASATR districts. They're still getting less than they were in 2011. Exceptional items requested. We have asked for restoration of the new instructional facilities allotment. Whether we'll get it or not, we don't know. And we've also requested a new round of IFA for $75 million in the second year of the plan.
Nothing in the first.
They always fund IFA in the second. I don't know why, but we always get, it always comes into the second year of the plan. So getting ready for the 2016-27 biennium. Pupil projections close in just a couple of weeks. Make sure that you submit. If you anticipate that your state comp ed numbers are going to change due to the CEP participation, increase your estimate, include that in your estimate, so that helps us to budget correctly for those increases. On the school finance litigation, we've got the district court ruling, and then next it's going to go to appeal. So it's, I don't think there'll be any resolution to that, the court case, a final resolution anytime soon. Quick discussion of property value growth and decline. Those big numbers that I just showed on the slide before of 8.7 and another 5.7% property value growth. This is what tax collections at the compressed tax rate have looked like over the past 7 years or so. Gone from just over $16 billion, and we're anticipating that's going to be close to $21 billion by the time 2016 comes around. So we're bringing in a lot more money from local property taxes. You can see the bad times there in 2011 when it actually went down. Tough time for the state. This is the average percent increase factors. See, 2015 is going to be a very strong year. Property value growth hasn't been as strong since 2008, 2009. But within that strong growth, there's still quite a lot of variance. You can see that the majority of the districts are clustered around sort of between 0 and 5% growth. We've got quite a lot out to the very far right. Typically, that would be like out in West Texas or Eagle Ford Shale that are growing 20% value growth a year. And then at the other end, we do have districts whose property values are falling. So that's kind of tough. We just wanted to.
Question.
Yeah.
A couple of 3 slides back, you talked about looking at 2011 for, I guess, funding levels in 2011, and those districts that are actually receiving less than the funding of 2011. Are those predominantly property wealthy districts?
Yes.
And that are still receiving ASATR?
Yeah, it's really about if you're still receiving ASATR, and that has been reduced by that factor.
No, can you share with me how, by 2017 it's going away? I mean, is that involved?
Yes.
That's what I thought. And so those districts are aware of that, and they're just getting less money, right?
Yeah.
Over the course of the next 2 or 3 years.
Yeah, they originally wanted to set it up so there would be what they called the glide path down, so it wouldn't be falling off a cliff, but the glide path didn't come about, and so not really. The factor, the 0.92 that they're using is being pretty much the same. And of course, those districts are lobbying hard to get some legislative relief from that going away in 2017. And I think that's going to be a big issue. They know that they need to address that for those districts.
The legislature needs to address what?
The cliff, the funding cliff for those districts that are still getting SATR. So some districts, it's still 20 or 30% of their funding. And they're typically districts that get a lot of funding, but it's still going to be very hard for them. So they're kind of thinking about ways to help them out, maybe still make ASATR go away, but help them out in other ways.
And was it not the fact that when the target revenue was created caused that problem?
Yes.
In 06?
Yeah. Interaction between what your summary finance issue is, state aid, and property value change. So before 2006, everybody used to be in a situation. There was no ASATR, and there was a one-year benefit associated with increasing property values. Because the local share of your FSP is based on prior year property values, so you might actually be collecting a lot more on your tax collections than we're using to discount from your FSP. And your wealth provider for recapture is also based on prior year values. It used to be called living off the lag, that you could make 5-10% more in collections than we would use to calculate your local share of FSP. So those days are back again for a lot of districts, and it can be very nice if you're in a situation where your property values are increasing rapidly. Just remember that the higher value will be rolled into the subsequent year. So unless you keep on growing forever, at some point it's going to catch on. For these districts that don't receive ASATR, decreasing property values would reverse this situation, and it would be doubly bad. Your local share of FSP would be based on your prior year values, and it would be greater than your actual collecting.
When you say double that, you're talking about for the state and for...
Well, for the district, yeah. If you're,
Yeah.
you know, in a decreasing property value situation, then you could be in a lot of hardship. For districts that still receive ASATR, increased tax collections are largely offset by reduced state aid even in the current year. It's a complete wash, and so you don't really get the benefit. And same on the downside. If your collections go down, your state aid goes up to make up the difference. This is a list of all the people that work in the state funding division and their telephone numbers and what they do. Hopefully, I think we're very service-oriented group. Hopefully, everybody gets a good experience when they call us up. Any questions?
What's the reaction in your area to the recent publication put out by the governor-elect in terms of what they're putting out there?
I'm not aware of anything real specific that he's proposed. So.
It was digital education and also pre-K.
Oh, yeah, well, they always want to expand pre-K until they find out how much it costs. So, we get that pretty much every biennium. If you want to make universal pre-K, $5 billion. So I think it is a really good idea. And I've heard that there are people in the legislature who do want to put a couple of $2 billion into education. That might be a good way to do it.
Regarding the pre-K ADA, that 147 per student, that's a lump sum indicated. Would that be a slant?
I don't know. Sorry, I just do the funding. I don't.
Question. In light of the lawsuit and the legislature turned it down in January, how is TEA going to be providing information to districts in light of the fact that we may not even know August or September of next year, what our funding's gonna be. You just gonna use current ball?
No, they'll pass a bill. They will pass a bill, and we'll know what the funding elements are going to be for the next biennium. That they won't pay attention to. So if
You think so?
yeah, and then if the court rules, then they'll have a special session and change things. But there will be an appropriation bill. We'll know what the basic allotment and everything's going to
Is
be.
it going up?
Maybe.
Well, it's gonna have to go if you wanna get all those districts off of ASATR.
Yes. And yeah. And we have such a big turnover in the legislature. Everybody's new to Senate particularly, and so nobody really knows what they can do.
That's
Alrighty, well, thanks for hearing me out.
While he gets set up, thank you so much for having us. My name is Christian Frandsen. I'm with the Texas Association of School Boards. Have you ever heard of us? Okay, I know we have about 30 minutes to lunch. We're going to keep it light, we're going to keep it fun and fast.
As fun as finance can be.
As fun as finance can be. Jared and I work as a team together. This is Jared McCurly from E3 Integral Solution. And since I was a teacher, I can talk pretty loud. So thank you for having us. Jared McCurly and I have done a lot of work in the Houston area. We're based in Houston. And some of you are already our customer with electricity or maybe transportation fuel. And we also do energy efficiency projects. And we're here today to talk about financing energy projects and how that can be advantageous to school districts.
Is this on? Everybody hear me? Okay, it is. All right. Thank you again for letting us come. This presentation originally is made for school boards. Now, I wanted you to see what TASB is telling your school board members about these types of projects. Now, all we're going to talk about today is concepts. I'm not going to talk about anything specific. I'm not really going to talk about technology. There's some really cool energy efficiency technology out there, but we're just going to talk about why you would want to do energy efficiency projects. Now, since we're in Region 4, I'm guessing all of you guys know everything about energy efficiency projects, and you've looked into it, saved as much as you can. How many 6A districts are here? 6A. Okay, so we actually have a mix. 5A. 5A, 4A. Okay, so there's some smaller ones too, or medium size. Let's go ahead. Why are you here? That's a big question. We always, well, you might be here because you were forced to be here by your boss. But when we're
No, there's the guy in the back.
We're not going to be rapping today.
That's my shirt. I will put that down. There we go. It's these dry fit golf. Are we good? Okay, we'll keep going. So, in front of school boards, we do the exact same thing. But we asked them why they are here, and you are actually there for the same reason. School board members are fun because they might have gotten or run for school board for any number of things. They might have run because they hate their football coach. They might have run because they thought that they could get better grades in the classroom. They might have run because they didn't want any more taxes. So when you're talking to a big room of school board members, it could be 100, 150 people. They can have any sort of agenda. But what they typically find out is, out of all these things that their agenda was, nothing's wrong with it. I mean, all of them are legitimate reasons to get on the school board, but what they find out is that they have to how many are you after? I don't know why. Anyways, that's supposed to pop up red, and all of the things that that get in the way of whatever they thought they were going to be doing. And typically the things that get in the way are M&O issues, because nobody cares about control systems. And air conditioning, you only have to have air conditioning because you have to have a cool building. You don't want do it. Oh, it's back. Move over here. I don't know. We'll keep going with this. I apologize for that. Long story short, often what we work on, which is all M&O, building infrastructure, gets in the way of the primary goal, which is educating students. And you have to allocate money to paying for all these things. But really, what your business is, or what they want, the taxpayers want you to do, and probably your superintendents want to do as well, is have an efficient business and have a really good classroom environment. Efficient business, really good classroom environment. Pretty much everything revolves around that. So, I'm going to skip through. It's my magnetic versus my feet. All right. So, we're going to skip through some of these. There we go. In terms of time. So, ask yourselves, does bond dollars or fund balance seem to be the only way you get projects done? Bond dollars or fund balance? This doesn't matter whether you're chapter 41 or 42. How many are 41, just so I know? Actual after this class. Oh, okay, just one, maybe a couple. All right, that's good. Well, even if you're 41, all of this applies. If you're not 41, this really applies, because we're going to hopefully talk about stretching your dollars as far as they possibly can stretch. So, does it seem like these are the only ways to get projects done? Now we're going to do a quick review, but you guys don't need a lot of this because you're all CFOs or in finance. But we tell everybody, look, or we tell the board members, you've got INS and you've got M&O. And then and within that, you can do lots of different financing methods. There it is. Maintenance tax notes, contractual obligations. There's SECO Lone Star, which we're going to talk about. How many of you guys have done QZABs, Qualified Zone Academy Bond? Anybody? Okay.
All right.
Okay.
Sheldon.
We're going to talk about this. It's out of money this year. It's out of money, but it's supposed to get re-upped. Apparently, QZABs have been stuck on a bill in Congress that the Republicans would basically be crazy not to pass. So most likely QZABs are going to be funded. So additionally, school districts of course can use grants, there's federal dollars and rebates. Rebates are still out there, I'm sure a lot of you are using them. However, there are no great federal grants right now. They're pretty much out. And we don't know of any that are coming right now. I mean, there's some very specialized ones, but the Cool Schools grant, where you got new air conditioning, maybe some of you got it. There's nothing like that where they're just handing out cash. Additionally, SECO doesn't have, usually they're the ones that administrate them, they don't have a bunch of cash that's coming, but they do Lone Star programs, so we'll keep going. So these are how you can fund your projects. We're not going to go through, is there maintenance tax note?
A QZAB is a maintenance
Wait,
tax.
well yeah, we'll get to that here in a second. I'm sure everybody in here knows what a maintenance tax note is. We are encouraged, but I wanted to stop for a second. We're not encouraging anyone to load up with debt. We want them to see that you can use debt vehicles to improve your M&O position. So in a second, we're going to talk about when would you ever want to use these. So when we're talking to school board members, you CFOs, don't worry. We're not sending them back to say, hey, we can maintenance tax notes and contractual obligations. We get as much money as we can. That's not what we're doing. There are specific reasons why you would use these, but a maintenance tax note is a great one. Obviously, it's some of you guys might be getting 2.5%, 3% money right now. You don't have to have voter approval, you know those. Contractual obligation. These are good when you have a smaller project, but less than $1 million, and there's not roofs or there's not personal property. When you don't have to do a roof or a window, everything that can be removed. Contractual obligation is fast. The issuance fees are lower because you don't have to have AG approval. So there's contractual obligation. SECO Lone Star, it's actually out right now. Have any of you done a SECO Lone Star project? Okay, one. Do you know what your opinion of it was? No? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. Thank you for raising your hand. If you raise your hand, I'm not always going to call you up.
Prior administration
Okay. These can be really good, but they're kind of a beating to deal with because you're dealing with the state, or the Texas State Energy Conservation Office. So it's not like you're dealing with your FA and you're just getting whatever you want. This is a revolving loan project or program where if you can come up with a project that pays for itself in 10 years, and that aggregate pays for itself in 10 years. So say you got some chillers that they'll pay for themselves in 20 years, but you got some lighting project that'll pay for itself in 3, you can push those together, apply for SECO Lone Star, and the interest rates right now are about 2%, and they give you a no issuance fee loan of 2% up to $7.5 million. This is a competitive process, but this is cheap money if you can come up with a energy project or a maintenance and operation project that pays for itself, simple payback in 10 years. If you do these, I highly recommend you work with someone that has put them together because they are a beating, and I say that nicely because we've done plenty of them. But if you don't know how to go through the process, it's just a bunch of paperwork. But once it's done, it can be a good thing, or the interest rates are very attractive. Then, you, on top of a maintenance tax note or actually a contractual obligation or a bond, if you pass a general obligation bond, there's something called a Qualified Zone Academy bond. This is a federal tax credit program. So, in lieu of you having to I'll give everybody a general overview. Some of y'all probably already know about it, but you put a maintenance tax note out for $2 million. The district puts it out as taxable. You guys are obviously tax exempt. That's why you get 2.5%, 3%. But you put it out as taxable. Bank of America funds it. In lieu of charging you interest now it's taxable, so 5%, 6%, they get a federal tax credit from the federal government. So you get effectively 0% interest up to 0.5% interest, sometimes higher, but there's a market that's going up and down like this. Well, multiple times we've gotten clients 0% interest fixed for 15 years for capital improvement projects that they were going to have to do anyways, meaning they were doing rooftop units and chillers and lighting. Which is about to lead us into why and when you would do these, because typically school districts, we can't do it, we gotta wait till we're borrowed. We can't do it, I don't have any fund balance. Not necessarily. You might be able to do some of these designations, get yourself some really good money for projects that you were gonna do anyways. And it's not nearly as attractive. Qualified construction, energy construction bond. So that's incorrect. That is a qualified energy conservation bond, is what that stands for. This is run through the Texas Bond Review Board. It is the same process as the QZAP. It's just a 75% tax credit to the lender. So instead of getting 0% interest effective to you or 0.5% interest effective to you, you get 1% or 1.5%. Still really good. This is also competitive. I did want to say again, there is no more for 2014, and they are supposed to refund this program in 2015. No promises. There is this money available. That's available. Again, I would encourage you to work with someone that has done them before. Okay, so now any questions? Kind of flew through that, but I'm sure all of that's just finance review for you. When does it make sense to do these? Great, I can load our district up with debt. Should you? Well, the reason that you would use these, there's a couple different reasons. When you don't want to spend fund balance, there's a bunch of different districts that we've worked with, and usually it's the medium size. And actually, I don't know, maybe the larger ones are this way. They've got a $10 million fund balance, maybe a $15 million fund balance, and they could do these projects out of it. Man, they could really keep the cash in their bank account or they'd like to if they could. I mean, so if they could get one of these QZAP notes at 0% or something, yes, they could fund their capital improvement, but it sure would be easier to pay it out over 15 years if you got a really good interest rate and it made business sense. So that's one. If you don't have fund balance, there's plenty of districts that do not have fund balance, or you have multiple projects going on, you don't have enough money to go around, you can't, or your district won't do a bond. So you can't pass a bond, or your administration says, no way, we're not doing that. I don't know about in this area because we're definitely, a lot of bonds are being passed right now. Other areas of the state, I mean, a bond is literally a four-letter word. It is as well figuratively. I mean, they haven't passed a bond in 20 years. They're not going to anytime soon. So, and then finally, if you want to maximize your M&O position. So what do I mean by all these things? How do we use these? Oh, these are PDFs. Yeah. Okay. I was like, why is it not working? So my animation, I'll have to explain it. My animation isn't going to work. So let's say, here's your, we're going to do a business case. So time, years, and then here's your annual M&O savings. Let's say the district has decided, you know what, we know we can save money. We can save money on energy or electricity, natural gas. We can save money on maintenance, repair. We know we can do that. We're going to put together a plan to do it over many years, right? And we're going to pay it out of fund balance. Let's say that you decided, okay, we're going to spend $1 million or $500,000, and we're going to start saving $50 or $50,000 every year. And then the next year, we're going to spend another $500,000. We'll start saving $75,000, and so on and so forth. Every single year, you're funding these projects slowly. And in a perfect world, granted, this is linear, you do start cutting into your M&O budget, and you're replacing everything. Well, the question is, what if you did one of those financing vehicles that I talked about and did it all up front? It was work you were going to do anyways, but every second it's just opportunity cost. Now, again, this isn't a perfect world. You have to find out if what I'm talking about even works. But this, you get to the same place in terms of equipment and energy savings. You just waste a lot of time and money. Because if you had decided, let's do a maintenance tax note for $10 million, or fund something for $10 million, and go ahead, and I know up front that we can get $300,000 if I spend, or whatever it is, let's say $3 million. If I spend $3 million and go get a maintenance tax note for $3 million, we'll be able to save $300,000 in the first or second year, and it will help me pay that back for years and years. So, you get to the same place. It just takes a lot longer, and you waste a lot of M&O savings. So you have to come up with a business case to make that real. I don't know for sure you can do it in your district, but this happens all over the place. I will say that some districts, they're running so tight, there's not a lot of savings that can be had. But there are others that there are plenty. So that's the concept. If I do go ahead and spend some money up front, I actually put myself in a better M&O position over years. So the opportunity cost. Next one, when you want to remove volatility from your budget. What do I mean by that? Well, a CFO's dream is typically this. So let me explain my axis here.
Is he right?
Time, and then here's your M&O projects, right? You would love it if your M&O budget looked like this every year. You could just count on it, and chillers don't break, and everything that's what you want. But the problem is, it typically looks like this. And you have these spikes, and often you're just trying to hang on, and I'm going to put money in it when I can. Well, one of the reasons that you would do one of these projects is if you have identified some capital improvement issues, some real maintenance things that are coming down the pipe, I don't have a bond, or I don't want to use bond, if you go ahead and use one of those vehicles we just talked about, you can put together a project. So let's go back to the $3 million. You get a $3 million note with it's easy interest. $300,000 is the note on that. Every year. Well, if you put these projects together, your M&O budget will bump up, but you'll take all of these spikes out. Now, if you do it correctly, or one of the ways to do it is to try to make everything pay for itself. So all you're really doing, or the concept is, it's not that perfect, but what you want to try to do, obviously, is say, hey, I can reduce my utility budget by $300,000. My note will now go up $300,000. So net to your budget, you don't spend any more money necessarily, but what you do is reach into the future and you try to prevent that. You say, you know what, I know that's coming in 2 or 3 years. I know for sure that's coming, and we don't know what we're going to do with it. Or you go ahead and put a plan. This is a proactive way of doing it. Now, my lines are not drawing the scale, but this is the concept. The last one, when you want to stretch your project dollars. Now this one's really big for 41s, but there's not a lot of them here, but really it's good for all districts. So let's say, I'll get my animations down. Let's say you have capital improvement budget of just $2 million, but you've got needs of $3 million. How many of you guys have been there? I got $5 million in needs, but I need 10 million, or I have $2 million to pay for it. Well, one of the ways that you can do this is if you know you've got these things that are coming, and usually it's whether you want them to or not. This is just school business work. You gotta do it. And things break, things get old. If you can put together one of those projects I talked about, say another $1 million project, and you get a note for it, close to 0% interest or 2% interest. So let's just say that the payment for the note is $100,000. So say you can figure out in your district, hey, we can save $100,000. I'll get one of those notes, contractual obligation, for $1 million, and it will pay for itself. That portion of the project will pay for itself over 10 years. Now all of a sudden you've got this $100,000 of savings that you find now gives you that $1 million that bridges the gap between I only have $2 million, I need the extra $1 million to do it. Again, doesn't mean it's great to load yourself up on debt. It's just if you can find business cases, really it's business cases, to make sense, it puts you in a better M&O position over time. Waiting, which just so you guys know, I'm a finance background, and in my personal finance, I wait and I push things off, and I don't like spending money. But I sit up here and tell you all day long that it can be very detrimental to a school district's budget if you do that, because my next slides will tell you why that is. Oh well, here's all the different. If you need to you do these if you want to maximize your energy savings. If there are energy savings out there, every second you wait, it's just like waiting to refinance your house. If it made sense today to refinance your house, if you wait longer, you just wasted money. Same thing goes here. You can remove risk and volatility from your budget. And then finally, you can stretch project dollars, or if you've got, I only have $2 million, I need $3 million, that's how you can do these projects. So how do you get it done? Questions, yes?
Anything, comments, questions? Feel free. Get you guys involved.
I think I got about 10, 15 minutes left. These are the fun ones. Delivery methods. Crisis management, reactive. It's not really a delivery method, but it's where about 70% of districts live. It's just when it breaks, we're going to fix it. When it breaks, just hold on. When it breaks, we're going to fix it. Run it till it dies. Problem with that, from my industry, running until it dies is the most expensive way for schools to do work. When it comes to your dynamic systems, especially when it comes to chillers and air handling units and all that, if you run it, rooftop units, if you're running it until it dies, you are wasting money. Let me give you an example. I learned this early. When, thankfully, my dad was kind enough to buy me a GMC Jimmy when I was in high school. It was a 1986 GMC Jimmy. I drove that thing all the way through college. And at the end, it had 176,000 miles on it. Now, we didn't know for sure it had 176,000 miles on it because the tachometer had broken at about 130. And so the odometer wasn't working anymore. And in fact, also the speedometer wasn't working either. So I could see what my RPMs were doing, so I kind of could gauge how fast I was driving. So at the end of that car's life, which was awesome, I appreciated that the whole way. It was right when I graduated from school. It was using about a quart of oil every other day. That's what it would run through. Every other day, I'd have to put a quart of oil in. Now, I had no money, and I was just praying to get out of college. So I learned very fast that it is really expensive to run something until it dies. In fact, I sold that car to somebody for $200. I didn't even run it till it all the way dies, but somebody else picked it up for me. The real point of all this is, one, it got very, very expensive. It got very expensive toward the end of its life. But I had, thankfully, education worked. I had gotten a job, and I was coming out. If I had taken that car to my job, I had to be out on the road for that particular It's actually the same one I'm in, just a different company. I had to be on the road quite a bit. That was a work tool. My vehicle was a work tool. So I had to have reliable transportation. It wasn't that the car that I got wasn't flashy, but it was reliable. Well, schools, and when it comes to these dynamic systems, they're work tools. You've got to have them. And we help districts, or we tell school board members this all the time. If you are, and the smaller ones are usually more of a habit of doing this, if you are forcing your operations guys to just grind it out until it breaks, it's expensive because they rush to fix it when it's time. If your answer to them is, CFOs, hear me, if your answer to them is, we don't have the money, I bet you find the money if your chiller goes out on graduation. If you say it's not in the budget, I bet you find the money at the beginning of school to get air conditioning. So in theory, extrapolating, you have the money in your budget, you're just waiting until you have to do it. I'm not encouraging you necessarily to go and just do everything, but it's true that if you have some of these dynamic systems go out, you'll figure out money somewhere in your budget. If you've been telling your operations guys that you don't have it, you'll find it. So it is in your budget. There's just a better way of managing the situation than wait until it breaks.
For example, just one minute. If you have a chiller that goes out, you have to take the chiller out, you gotta put a temporary chiller in, but you gotta get it up there. You gotta pay for the crane to get it up there, then you gotta pay for the rental on the unit. And then you gotta pay for a new unit that's gotta be ready next week. So you gotta sometimes pay.
And you never get, if you're in crisis mode from a mechanical point of view, if you're getting things that Train or Carrier or whomever has in stock, that's not necessarily the best one for you long term. It's just what they have. I mean, it'll work and give you cold air, but it's not necessarily the best. So it's always better to do a project. And that goes for all things, not just air conditioning. These dynamic systems, I'm talking about mainly lighting and controls. But design, bid, build. I now quickly go through these. We use, design, bid, build is how vast majority of the work you do. Vast majority. So this is getting your architect, getting an engineer, bid it out, get a GC, a construction manager. I'm speaking only on renovation. Everything I've talked about has been retrofit and renovation. For new construction, this is the way to go typically. You're going to get, usually you drive down the cost of it. There's inherent problems often when you do that. This is a good way. You have multiple levels of accountability. The problem is when you're doing design, bid, build for renovation, retrofit, if you're focused on first cost when it comes to these types of situations, you will hamstring yourself for years. And in fact, if we come onto your campus and did an energy study for you, 95% of the time, we're seeing that your brand new buildings are the worst running buildings in your districts. The brand new buildings were usually built to a budget, and the first things that get cut, and all you guys probably know this, but just to give you insight on this industry, the first things that get cut are all the things that reduce M&O costs. And they'll cut out all the ductwork, they cut out the commission, they definitely cut the commissioning out so that it never ran to begin with when you started up. So this goes the same for retrofitting. If you have to be sure that your project pays for itself, design, bid, build might not necessarily be the best way to do it. Let's get through that. Design, build, however, that's getting one company to be in charge of it, one company to build it, or one company to design it, and then build it, and then support it on the back end. The reason that this is in this group, the way that TASB would even get into this helping districts was you've got one throat to choke. There's only one entity that's accountable. Well, if you're doing projects that you're supposed to rely on savings, you've got to make sure that happens. Now, like I said, in new construction, architects and engineers, they're not bad guys. They're designing buildings that are supposed to be energy efficient. They'll even tell you, hey, this is supposed to work. How is it possible that you get buildings that are built inefficiently? What's that? It's when you get to the table, it's not my fault, it was the piping guy's fault, or it was the controls guy's fault. It's very difficult in the previous delivery method to make buildings work right. So we do a design build. Now there are some problems here, so let me not paint a picture that design build is the only way to go for these types of projects. If you do not get someone that really knows what they're doing, you only have one person that's accountable. So in the design bid build, you've got architect, engineer, GC, and there are some problems there because that's when finger pointing comes. But if you don't pick a really good design builder, that can also have some inherent problems because if they aren't experts at all of these items, then you only have one person to rely on. So there's a two-edged sword there. A couple more slides and we'll be done. Okay, I'll give you just a quick example and we'll get out of here. So, business case, this is a real situation. A school district had about $2 million worth of needs that they had identified. So chillers were failing, they wanted to do some more controls work and some lighting work. They had a bond that they wanted to pass in about a year and a half. So they were willing to spend fund balance to show the community, hey, we're doing this. But if they didn't have to spend fund balance, they didn't necessarily want to. They loved to keep the cash in the bank if they could. So, what was the ultimate question was, what's the best way to tackle this? Well, finally what they did was, like I said, it would be great, they had the fund balance, but it would be great to not spend that money if they didn't have to. So, they decided that they were going to leverage the M&O savings. They did a design, bid, build project. They took care of all of their, not design, bid, build. They did a comprehensive design build project. So here's what the financials, the CFOs, this is what you're going to care about. Their project cost, this was work they were going to do anyways over the next 2 to 3 years. They had to, so this was failing. The project cost was $2.1 million. They went and they issued a maintenance tax note, the QZAB designation, they got them 0.25% interest, so 1/4% fixed for 15 years. Now the only reason, just to caveat, that would have been 0, but they wanted a call option on it, just in case they wanted to sink it to it. So that call option gave them 0.25. Still, 0.25% interest. So their payment on the note was $143,000. That was what they had to do. Well, in that project, it wasn't self-funding, which is always nice, but again, it was work they had to do. They had about $66,000 in savings every year that they would feel, or that they would get back into their M&O budget. So the net, payment minus savings equals, they basically had to come up with $76,000 a year to get $2.1 million worth of work done today. Now, and you can see that that was sort of a quote. The superintendent said, it's a lot, which is easier for us to budget roughly $76,000, $77,000 every year, or for 15 years, or come up with $2.1 million over the next 2 to 3 years. And the difference is, just up here, they were going to spend it anyways. Literally their chiller failed the week before we installed the next one. So for them, it put them in a better M&O position over time to go ahead and finance that. And just to show you, but this is the last thing. It's great financing. What these projects really do is improve your environment. They improve classroom environment. They do make your business more efficient, but they improve your classroom environment because they got chillers and they got security fencing and security controls and pumps and all that stuff, and they were able to maintain their environment better. So yes, it's good financial decisions, but ultimately, last thing, this is a quote from the superintendent, they had a gym that was new, that had never really worked from the beginning. Nobody knew why. But after we were done with it, superintendent said, that's the first time I've been comfortable in that gym in 13 years. So yes, it makes good financial sense, but it improves the classroom environment. Savings graph. Basically, this is the last slide. You can figure out if things save. So here's per month. This is the black line of what we had estimated they were going to save. So this is Mercedes ISD, $603,000 a year over a year. That's what we had estimated that they saved. What they calculated from the utility company. So this wasn't fuzzy math. This was just this many kWh minus this many kWh. That's the savings. They ended up saving $760,000 in that first year. So it helped them fund. That was a rather large project. So that's it. Thank you. Any questions?
Where's the beef?
Where's the beef?
Financial Benefit Services is a TPA, and the little presentation I had today was something just to kind of walk through, just a little bit about who we are. And then what we're running into, kind of our solutions we're offering to our school districts that we manage their employees into for the ACA compliance.
Thank you for that. Don't let us.
There we go.
For your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you. They're awesome. Appreciate it. That's what it's like. All right, so road trip kind of was the idea. What about a road trip? Where are you going to end up in 2016 with your ACA and IRS reporting? That's kind of the roadmap that you're going to have. So this is my Winnebago. Has anybody ever taken a Winnebago trip across Texas? That's your roadmap. FPS. Now, we are designed to provide a service team for your district, and we provide that for our school districts. So we are licensed consultants. Peggy is here. Peggy has been my account executive in Austin ISD and in the Austin area. We just completed Austin ISD's enrollment. Heidi back at the office, CSR, answering the phones, coordinating all your services, your day-to-day. We have an assigned billing coordinator because we're going to consolidate your bill every month. That would be Alicia. And technology. So we're going to have a technology manager that's assisting us with the deployment of your online enrollment and all your needs. All right, here we are. That'll be in Dallas. Friday's always a good day if the Cowboys win on Thursday night. Didn't look like they were going to win though at the end, did it? Looked like Chicago was coming back. So right here in our office is our consulting. We are managing 400 school districts that have close to 400,000 all members, dependents, children, employees. We act as a consultant to review all your benefits annually. We have 8 regional co-ops. 14 of the 20 service centers are our clients that we're managing their employee benefits. In our offices, we're going to administer your billing each month. Retirement plans. Call centers. Now this was a huge, huge asset during the Austin enrollment that we just had in October, but in August, the TRS enrollment, because it was mandatory, wasn't it, that every employee, if you were a TRS member, TRS active care, that they had to go through the enrollment. We had a call center standing by. We coordinated the enrollment online and at each campus. Now let me ask you a question. Raise your hand if you are going to amend your plan document with your 125 plan and add the one-time drop that's just been released by the IRS. So employees can drop without a qualifying event and sign on during the marketplace enrollment. Did anybody decide to do that? It just was released. Like they offered it last year, but this new amendment will actually be ongoing. So once you amend your plan document to allow the one-time drop, you don't have to amend it again. It's every year when the marketplace opens up, your employees would be, if you allow it, they'd be allowed to drop off your medical with no qualifying event to go to the marketplace. Commodore Remitter, that's our benefit administration. It's all consolidated. FBS with the technology in-house. We've been pioneering, developing the online enrollment. We have 97 enhancements we're releasing this year alone in 2015. That is a huge task. The programmers are all in-house. They are a huge team, and they have it designed where in January, our online compliance is going to go live for the ACA compliance. So as you have to track monthly, all your employees, all their elections that they either sign up for or they waive, we're actually developing the software so it's going to be able to spit out the report at the end of the year. Because it's going to start tracking it in January for 12 months.
How are you tracking subs?
You build a subclass in. That's a good question. Because subs are the key to everybody's problem. And so you build a subclass in, so you have all employees that actually can log in and enroll with all their benefits, with your maintenance of effort, right? Your employer contribution. And then you have a subclass. So when you add your employees in, whether it comes through our automatic feed, because the large districts, all of them with their IT department can build the automatic feed, so nightly it's updating our system. The subclass goes into the subclass. The sub is sent an email notifying them that they are available for enrollment, but no maintenance of effort would show up. No dental, vision, disability, cancer, or life would show up. No flexible spend account. Just medical. Either they sign up or they waive. And you require them to add their dependents, because the IRS is going to say, did you offer to the employee and their children? You don't have to worry about spouses. But you better have had all your employees sign up and make their
So your districts are offering to all subs, regardless of how many hours they're working a week?
No, that you didn't say. Offering is going to be part of the compliance. The system will be able to allow you to add your subs in so that you offer to them. And so it's your choice whether or not you offer to them or not. If your plan year is September 1, then your offering compliance does not go into effect until September 1, 2015. The affordability goes into effect January 1. If you were a January 1 plan year start date, then right now your offering and your affordability goes into effect, and you will be reporting that in 2016. And how you offer your subs, most districts they never offered it to them. That's your biggest problem. I'm an honest person, and I'm not afraid to tell you that that is your biggest problem. You never offered it to them before. You are sitting back kind of going, well, we're not going to give them our maintenance of effort, and they don't really want it. How many of you offered it to them this year? How many of them took it? Raise your hand if you had 2 employees. You made them pay in advance, didn't you? And so how long are they going to keep that insurance? I don't know. If it's family premium, it's over $1,000 that they're out of pocket, and they're probably not subbing that much. So there's a great conversation to have sitting down with you on your strategy, and that's going to be one of my number 1 points, is strategy. And our web-based enrollment portal is definitely going to keep you compliant with all the access, the interaction, the 24-hour support. I think a lot of you should already have that in place. Are they going to have the technology that's designing for the future, the strategy built in? So we are not outsourcing the technology. That's going to be a big problem. Because since it's in-house, we can configure it to exactly your needs. So when we sit down with you, we want to understand your goals. And by doing that, then we build a strategy to satisfy your needs. And the billing is in-house. So it's all reconciled, common remitter. That Alicia is our manager. So she oversees all 400 school districts, and you have a coordinator, but she oversees all the discrepancies and the common remitter to the carriers. Back at Dallas. Want to jump back into Winnebago? All right. So we would show up at your campuses and do your enrollment, but why not allow the call center going forward to really manage your enrollments to reduce the impact of strangers showing up on your campuses? So right there, we'll show up. That looks familiar, doesn't it? An online enrollment, you log in, they got a user agreement, says whatever they sign up for is locked in, electric signature. Oh, TRS Active Care. If you choose that plan, you will need to make sure that your providers are in that select network if you live in those counties. I'm not going to take the select plan for my spouse. I hope you collected declinations on all the declines, and it's tracking them. Then they've walked through the enrollment. Congratulations. You want to email the form to them? Of course. It's the easiest way, no paper. So they're not having to print it up and loose paper. The forms are emailed, and they get an email notice. All new hires get the same notice with a statement of your enrollment is ready. That is compliance. You have to offer it to everyone. Or you choose not to. You choose not to offer it to yourself. Oh, let me go back. This is another important feature. If you can manage your enrollment to completion, Austin had 12,000 employees. We went to 144 campuses, Peggy and I did, in October with 25 enrollers. We were able to see 99.99% of their employees. We got it down to like 100%, but their new hires kept on adding into the system. So you see 12,000 in green, or 11,900, and 100 in red. It's showing incomplete. If I click on the red, I can send all of them an email right now, broadcast it out with no reply saying, you haven't completed your enrollment, you need to get it done by the end of the week. The roadblock between the mountain paths. Oh man. Gosh darn it. Those are your 1095C, 1094C forms that you will be transmitting to the IRS. And they are the most painful looking reports. And that's straight from Holly Murphy's mouth, if you've gone to her workshop. And I've been in a lot of pain. I was in a car accident December the 10th, 1995. Went off the road. I was a passenger and slammed into a power line pole. And I know what pain feels like. I was stuck in that car for 4 hours. And so you have to align your action plan to be prepared for these reports. That's all I'm going to tell you. Align a plan, a strategy to build your action plan, because you're responsible. You will put a contact name and a contact phone number on those forms. And you want to do everything possible to complete your data collection each month. That is going to be the crucial part, is that you have a system set up in place to collect the data. That's one thing I can ask you to walk away, go back, sit down and design your strategy on how you're going to collect the data each month from your time and attendance and the coverage elected from your enrollment system, so that you can bring those together each month, and you're tracking everybody that you offered or that declined insurance each month. Because at the end of the year, you're going to report for 12 months based on each month. The forms are at irs.gov, and all you got to do is type in 1094C, 1095C, and they'll pop up, and they're drafts because they haven't been formally released. Because if you're over 250 employees, you're going to electronically file. But each employee will get that form too. We want to assist with that. That's our technology that we are developing, and it will be released to be able to track all that data so that you can put together and assemble your reports. Over the hill, we got through the breakthrough. That's my presentation. What I would say is we care about all of our clients, and we care about you. We would like to just have a conversation with you, sit down and talk about your pain points, if you have any, how you are planning on approaching the ACA, and if there's anything we can do to help. That's where we specialize in. We are service-driven, and that's our focus, to understand your needs and to build a strategy so that you have a successful plan in place. All right, hey, thank you so much. It's always a great opportunity to sponsor lunch. Monica Leatherman, Peggy Bishop, Houston Sales, and our consultants here in the Houston area. Peggy has been my account executive in Austin, and they're great people. We have a great team. Let us help you if we can. Thank you. Does anybody have any questions? You had some great questions about subs. That was my question. How many people offered it to their subs? And are you giving them the maintenance of effort?
Do you have to?
When it comes down to the offering,
No, maintenance of effort.
no, not the maintenance of effort.
You don't. How many of your districts amended their 125 plan to allow rollover of flex plan?
Half or more.
Half or more? Did they go to full amount?
They did the $2,500, the $500 rollover, yes, sir. So this year, when you move into your next plan year, they could have up to $3,000 if they didn't use any of their first year's contribution, and have $3,000 to use. More than half wanted to do it. And there's a lot of interest in that one-time draw. Because what's it going to impact you? The subs that might go out to get a subsidy, when the healthcare opens up right now, they can go up there. And if they've been working as a full-time employee on your books, then they can go get a subsidy, possibly qualify for it, because you're not paying your maintenance of effort. So the plan's not affordable to them. And affordability is where you're gonna get the subsidy, the penalty. And so, what do you do about that? Well, how many is it gonna be? How many do you honestly think are gonna go out there? How many employees are gonna go get a subsidy that are your full-time subs? Now, if you have 2,000 subs sitting over here, that's gonna be one of the things you're gonna really be tracking them and capping them at 16 days, so they don't work more than 16 days, so they don't hit the 130 hours a month. And if you're not tracking them, are you having them clock in? If you're not having them clock in, let's go back to the problem. You choose to not do that. I can't say it was fun. You are choosing to not put in place the strategies to prevent that from happening. And the subsidies might impact a very large district. I don't think they're going to impact the majority of districts, but I think when it comes down to it, if you didn't offer it to them, and they are full-time employees, the offering penalty is what you do not want. You do not want, that's for all employees, you will be penalized $167 a month for all employees, because you were under the 70, this year it's only 70% you had offered. 2016, it goes to 95% that you offered it to 95% of all full-time employees. You offered your health insurance to 95% of all full-time employees in 2016. And that's where your subclass is going to hit you if you have a big subclass. That could drop you below the 95% rule, right? And so I'm sure if you have looked at, that's where you have to build your strategy in your action. And does anybody have the exact answer on how to do that? Only you. And it's only going to be based on you tracking them and capping them. And if you're not going to cap them, then you better offer them something. And you can design a plan that's different than your current plan. You can design a plan just for them. And it has minimum value, which means it has to at least have 60% co-insurance, and it has the minimal essential coverage, the MEC. So those two things, minimum value and minimal essential coverage, make up a medical plan that could be affordable, that you could pay for, employer paid to all subclass. Maybe that's a strategy. Maybe a minimal essential plan only, a MEC, is something that might be in a range of $50. And you offer to the employee, it's automatically paid for by the employer, and you say, we're buying this on you if you choose not to take the TRS medical. Maybe that could work. You have a year. Get ready. If you're September 1. And if you're January 1, you've made your decisions already on what maybe you budget in, what you might be potentially getting.
All right.
It's always enjoy being here.